In medieval Europe, according to common law, a child was considered to be a minor until the age of majority, which was usually around the age of 12 for boys and 7 for girls. At these ages, children were considered to have reached the age of reason and were held accountable for their actions. However, the specific age of majority varied depending on the jurisdiction. In some cases, the age of majority was as high as 21. Before the age of majority, children were under the legal guardianship of their parents or other adult guardians and were not considered fully responsible for their actions. This meant that they could not enter into contracts or be held fully accountable in a court of law. The high child mortality rate in medieval times was a significant problem, and many children did not survive their first year of life. Factors contributing to the high child mortality rate included poor sanitation, limited medical knowledge and treatments, and diseases such as influenza, smallpox, and measles. Additionally, infant mortality was often higher in urban areas compared to rural areas, due in part to the crowded and unsanitary living conditions that were common in medieval cities. Children who did survive their first few years of life often faced other challenges as well, such as malnutrition and the threat of disease. Despite these challenges, many children in medieval times were able to overcome these hardships and go on to live full and productive lives. Daily lives of medieval children. The daily lives of peasant and noble children were very different in medieval times. Peasant children, who made up the majority of the population, generally had very hard lives and were often required to work from a young age to help support their families. Peasant children were often expected to work in the fields or perform other labor duties, and they often had very little time for leisure or play. Noble children in medieval times often lived in castles with their parents and were raised in a very structured environment. Boys were typically sent to other castles at a young age to begin training to become knights, and girls were taught household management skills and other domestic tasks. Boys who were being trained to become knights typically spent their days practicing martial arts, riding horses, and learning about chivalry. Girls were often taught skills such as cooking, sewing, and other household tasks that would be necessary for running a household. Both boys and girls were also taught about their social obligations and the expectations placed on them as members of the nobility. Education of medieval children. Education in medieval Europe was generally limited to the children of the nobility and the wealthy merchant class. Peasant children, who made up the majority of the population, usually did not receive any formal education. The church did play a significant role in the education system of the Middle Ages. Many cathedral schools were established by bishops, and these institutions provided a high level of education to a smaller number of students. These schools taught a wide range of subjects, including Latin, theology, and the liberal arts. Monasteries also provided education, and many monks were well educated and skilled in subjects such as manuscript illumination and copywriting. However, again, these educational opportunities were generally limited to the children of the nobility and the wealthy. Education was an important part of a noble child's upbringing in medieval times, and boys who were being trained to become knights were expected to have a certain level of literacy. This was because the Code of Chivalry, which outlined the principles and ideals that knights were expected to adhere to, was written down, and knights were expected to be able to read and understand it. Medieval children diets. The diets of noble and peasant children in medieval times were quite different due to the vast economic gap between the two classes. Peasant children generally had very simple and basic diets, consisting primarily of grains, vegetables, and sometimes also a small amount of meat. Thick stews made from grains and vegetables, such as pottage, were a common food for peasant children. Noble children, on the other hand, had access to a much wider range of foods, and their diets were generally more diverse and varied. Their diets might include white bread, fish, meat, vegetables, and a variety of fruits. Noble children also had access to more expensive and luxurious foods, such as spices, sugar, and sweetened desserts. It was common for children under the age of 5 to drink milk, as it was believed to be more nourishing for growing bodies. Children between the ages of 5 and 14 were sometimes allowed to drink watered-down wine, which was considered less potent than full-strength wine. What clothes did medieval children wear? In medieval times, children's clothing was generally similar to that of their parents, although it was often simpler and less elaborate. Boys wore tunics, which were loose-fitting garments that came down to their knees, and girls wore tunics that reached their ankles. Both boys and girls might also wear hosen, which were long, fitted pants and shoes or boots. Poor children often wore simple, practical clothing made from rough, inexpensive materials such as wool or linen. They might also wear socks or stockings to cover their legs, and leather shoes, although the poorest children might not have access to footwear. Noble children, on the other hand, might wear more luxurious and elaborate clothing made from fine materials such as silk and velvet. Their clothing might also be adorned with intricate embroidery and other decorative details. Medieval children's toys and games. Medieval children played with a variety of toys and games, including dolls, marbles, sticks, rattles, and spinning tops. Girls often played with dolls called poppets, which were made from a variety of materials including cloth, wax, wool, wood, or clay. These dolls were often dressed in different kinds of costumes, and the style of clothing might reflect the social status of the child who owned the doll. Poor girls' dolls were often dressed in working clothes, while noble girls' dolls were often dressed in long robes. Hobby horses and rocking horses were also popular among noble children, and these toys were often painted and decorated to look like real horses. Children from all social classes enjoyed playing games like hide-and-seek, seesaw, and tag. And children from wealthy families might also play board games such as checkers and chess. Swimming was also a popular activity, especially in the summer months. In summary, the lives of medieval children were often quite difficult due to the harsh living conditions and limited medical knowledge of the time. Many children did not survive their first few years of life, and those who did often faced other challenges such as malnutrition and the threat of disease. It is true that there were fewer educational facilities in medieval times, and only a handful of children were present. Education was generally limited to the children of the nobility and the wealthy merchant class, and most children did not have the opportunity to receive a formal education. It was also common for children, especially girls, to be married at a young age in medieval times. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and join us in the next video.